Once your solution is in AWS, it's important to understand how to manage your costs. There are some great tools from AWS and third parties that give you views into your costs and how they change over time. However, having an advanced cost optimization strategy is much more than running some tools and reading some results. Jeremy, we see a lot of customers that migrate to the cloud, and over time, the cloud gets more expensive, sometimes like a cost creep that occurs. Sometimes they get surprised with spikes in their monthly bills and they don't know how it happened. How can that be avoided for a more budget friendly, predictable spend?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jacob. So, one thing that I'd like to mention is with Kickdrum's experience working with private equity, we develop a lot of what we call maturity rubrics, where we are looking at a company and how mature they are in handling an area of their business, whether that be product strategy or DevOps or things like that. We have developed one that we call the financial maturity rubric, and that's looking at how internal to the organization you review your costs. So taking beyond just those things that you mentioned with the tools available and actually how do you use those internally? That may be things like reporting and alerting that's available through those tools, making sure, for example, that you have alerts set up anytime that there's spend above a certain threshold. Because again, bear in mind that when we're talking about cloud spend, there's the possibility, because it's elastic, for it to jump very quickly in a very short period of time. We had a customer about a year ago where we were able to identify that within a few hours because we had access to their bill, and they were able to make changes quickly and avoid a very large, shocking bill. Beyond that, there's also assigning ownership and interlock between departments. And I think this can be commonly overlooked, but it's a critical part of how you manage the financial component of moving to the cloud. So, for example, a customer that we had a couple of years ago, they had an environment where DevOps owned the cost of the infrastructure and they were responsible for optimizing that cost. But the dev team mandated the tech that was being used. And so DevOps really could only apply a few of the more basic principles around cost optimization and management because of this conflict with dev. When you move that ownership of the financial responsibility further into the organization, you see better outcomes. Now, a separate example from that, we had a customer about a year ago called Propio. With them, we made a number of recommendations that were really around how to change your infrastructure. So that means we did apply some of the things like reserved instances in order to bring the cost down. But we also looked at things like there are reserved instances in place that actually aren't being used because there was a change made to the server classes. And those reserved instances are based on server class. So we recommended using things like savings plans to bring down some of those costs that have a little bit more flexibility to them. We also noticed areas where utilization was low, and we recommended they downsize to smaller instances. And we saw that they were using an older storage solution that had a higher cost. So we made recommendations around that as well. We even went so far as to look at some of their regions and noticed that there were NAT gateways in unused regions. There was a database migration service that was no longer in use, but they were being charged for on a monthly basis. These can be artifacts of ownership over time changing, where in this scenario, somebody had set up those services and then had left the company. So it's important to have somebody looking across the board as well as ownership of individual components. So those recommendations made a real difference in their bill, and they were absolutely very happy to see that.
And at AWS, it's not just about what exists now. You'll hear the term modernization in conjunction with migration. So, can you explain that modernization process and some of the benefits that may occur when you dive into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So a great example of this would be a customer of ours, Map Digital, and they're a cloud marketing company, and they were in a data center environment, and we moved them into AWS. And they were having a lot of problems, especially around the holiday season. So essentially, they had to have a data center environment where they were provisioned for the spikiest time of year for them, the holiday season. If you think about it, right, Black Friday, you're going to get a lot of emails. The lead up to Black Friday, you're going to get a lot of emails. So when you have that type of seasonal pattern associated with the use of your service, you really are having to provision for those highest usage times of the year. And then you've got a lot of excess capacity. And beyond that, if during that time of year you have more than you anticipated in terms of usage, then you can end up with very dissatisfied customers. And that's what was happening with them. They were having delays in emails being sent out because queries were taking too long. So we moved them into AWS and we moved them onto a modern, elastic, scalable database. And that allowed for those queries to happen in real time very quickly and scale up according to the needs of their broad set of customers. Now, during the lower months, when there was less activity going on, their costs were brought down substantially. I believe, if I recall correctly, we lowered their annual costs by about 50%. But when it came time for those seasonal spikes, they had the performance and the customer satisfaction that they were looking for. Now, of course, there is a trade off associated with this. When you move to the cloud and you decide to modernize, if you're moving to those managed services, you are locking yourself a little bit more into that particular cloud provider. You're architecting for that managed service in that cloud. So that's something that you need to consider very carefully. And we recommend considering your strategy in two ways when it comes to maybe shying away from those services. The first would be if you're planning on a multi-cloud strategy. So we have had customers, for example, where they won't do business with one cloud provider because they view them as a competitor. And so our customer actually is forced into having a multi-cloud environment where some customers are on one cloud provider and some are on another. When you have that type of situation, from an overhead standpoint, it's better for you to stay away from the managed services and go with something that can be shared. So that's things like, instead of Kinesis, maybe you use Kafka, or you use Kafka managed service so that you're a little bit toe dipped, but you're not the full way into it. And the other thing is, if you want portability for your negotiation, if you want to be able to say, I have a plan to move, or I have the ability to move away from this cloud provider. So those are two key areas where we would recommend considering that.
And this is why it's so important to have an advanced plan, right? It's not just reading certain tools out there, trying to figure out, little bits of cost optimization here and there. A very broad plan is important. And in the case you're talking about now with portability, you can build a whole business case on why or why not that may be valuable for a specific customer. And you want to look at those business cases because a lot of times when you're moving to a cloud provider, you're locked in for a long period of time. And you can have substantial savings by modernizing to optimizing in that cloud provider. And if you're okay with that, obviously you can save substantial money by doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this goes back to what we talked about in that video about your planning. It's the business case that sits behind it.
Mhm.
Make sure that everything you're doing lines up to that business case.
And at Kickdrum, we spend a lot of time working with private equity companies, family offices, firms that have multiple investments and want to see those returns happening quickly. They also want to see those companies set up very well for growth. And so modernizing allows that kind of elastic nature where you really can grow the company, expand to new markets, and capture value all throughout the holding period. At Kickdrum, we perform cost optimization diagnostics that go beyond these typical analyses we referenced earlier. And we deep dive into analyzing storage, compute, data transfer, networking, architecture, and even customer analysis, where we've identified unprofitable customers that then allow those companies to go back and renegotiate to make those relationships profitable. So we'll perform diagnostics for one company, Or we'll do an entire portfolio scan if it's a private equity firm or a family office that has multiple investments to uncover the most likely savings opportunities across a whole suite of investments. Then we'll often stay engaged to monitor metrics and monthly bills for them to head off any potential cost spikes in the future. So that's what we're talking about when we mean advanced cost optimization. If you're looking for a partner that can help you with pre migration planning, with the actual migration process itself, even with accelerating some of your dev roadmap, or if you just want a second opinion on what you should be spending in the cloud, reach out to us at Kickdrum. Check out kickdrum.com to find out all the services that we have available for you.